Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, COVE students. I hope you guys are receiving this video in good spirits and you're ready to learn because today we are covering 1 Samuel 8. And this is one of my favorite chapters in one of my favorite books of all the Bible. So it's safe to say this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. And part of the reason why I say that is because it is so very easy to relate to, in my opinion. So before we get into it, I want to tell you guys a quick story about a young Luke. And actually about a young Kyle as well. Kyle is my older brother who's 3 years older than me. So we grew up in a home. We always had a roof over our head and a plate of food to eat, which is something that really we take for granted for nowadays, but we were blessed to have that. And we had parents that loved us. We had parents that always showed us the best path to take. They taught us about God at a young age. We always knew what the gospel was. We really didn't have much to complain about at all as kids. But we were kids, and we did complain. And one of the main things that we wanted, there was one thing that me and my brother wanted more than anything. And it was a Nintendo 64. If you guys don't know what a Nintendo 64 is, look at your Nintendo Switches, Mario, all of that. Like, it came from Nintendo. And about 20 years ago, they weren't making Switches, they weren't making Wiis, they were making the Nintendo 64. I'm really showing my age here if you guys don't know what it is. It's kind of sad that you don't know what it is, but that was the thing when I grew up. And me and my brother, we'd go over to our friend's house and we'd see them play this, and we're like, man, this is so cool. And so one year, me and my brother asked for a Nintendo 64 for Christmas. Like, that's all we wanted because we saw all of our friends playing with it. We're like, man, like if we could have that, that'd be so awesome. That'd be so cool. And so we get to Christmas. Our cousins are opening up their presents first. Sure enough, they open up a Nintendo 64, and we're like, dang, all right, like, it's our turn. Like, we're finally going to get one. We open up our presents, we don't get one. And I remember talking to our parents afterwards, telling them, like, Mom, Dad, we want this more than anything. Why won't you give this to us? And pretty much what they said was, Luke, Kyle, we are your parents, and we know what's best for you. We know that you guys want this, but we know that if you guys got this, it really wouldn't give you what you need. It really wouldn't do great things for you. Instead, it would probably bring you more discomfort in your life. So just trust us. Just trust that we know what's best for you. Now, when I was 5 or 6 years old, that speech didn't really help. And I complained a lot, and I didn't quite understand why they wouldn't give us what we wanted. And I would see my cousins now play with their Nintendo 64. I would see everyone playing with it. And I would think to myself, man, if only I had that, I'd be living a good life just like them. Even though I had nothing to complain about. And I had parents who loved me. And I had a fun, great life, a great childhood growing up. But I would always look at that Nintendo 64 and think, I'm missing something. Why am I telling you this story? Well, 1 Samuel 8 covers a very similar story, just like that. So before we get into that, let me ask you a question, and let's think about it for a second. What is something in your life, maybe the similar story, what is something in your life that you wanted and your parents said no? And why do you think they said no about it? Why do you think they wouldn't let you have that? Think about that for a minute. See, the thing that the Israelites wanted, that the Lord was saying no to for centuries, was a king. And so we start this passage, this chapter, with just that. The people of Israel come to Samuel, who is the judge at the time. He's their spiritual leader. He is not a king. If we remember correctly, we just went over the book of Judges last month, and we're going over 1 Samuel now. The Israelites do not have a king. Instead, God has been their leader. It's been not a monarchy is what a king, like a government that is run by a king. That's what that means. Israel was a theocracy, which meant they were a government that was ran by God. They were ran by priests and prophets. And so pretty much what would happen was God would speak to these leaders, these spiritual leaders, these prophets, people like Moses as well, or people like Samson or Deborah or Gideon or Samuel. He would use them as God would be the microphone, and those people would be the speakers, and his voice would go through them. And that was how the nation of Israel was ran. It was a theocracy. So God was at the center. God was their king, technically. Well, the people of Israel, one day they come to Samuel and they're like, listen, we want a king. We don't want you to lead us. We don't want God to lead us. We want a king, just like all the nations around us. See, like the Philistines, the Amalekites, the Canaanites, all of them, they had what the Israelites wanted, what the Israelites did not have, and that was a king. And so Samuel is just upset about this, partially because in the book of Deuteronomy, they talk about how the nation of Israel shouldn't have a king, and what will come, like the struggles that will come with having a king. There's a passage that talks about how when you get a king, you're going to get taxed, you're going to get people taken from you, you're going to get land taken from you, because that's how a monarchy works. And Samuel knows that this theocracy system that they've been doing is the best way to lead a government. And so he's offended. And he goes to God, and God quickly kind of humbles Samuel and is like, listen, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And that's an even bigger problem. By saying that they want a king, they are saying what they have right now isn't good enough. That I'm not a good leader. They are rejecting me as their king, and they're saying that someone that's a man would be a better leader than me. So God and Samuel are on the same page as this, and they realize that the people of Israel, they want what's not best for them. And it's upsetting to them. But God says to Samuel, warn them about what a king means, having a king, what that means in their lives. So Samuel goes to them, and he says this. This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. You yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So Samuel warns the people of Israel, and he says, look, you guys want a king. This is what's going to happen. The best of everything is going to be taken from you, and it's going to be given to this king. The best of your sons, the best of your daughters, the best of your land, the best of your cattle. Everything that was valuable, everything that was like considered a resource would be given to the king. And the worst thing of all is that the day that you realize that you made that mistake, you will cry out to God, and he will not hear you. And so pretty much what he's saying is, once you guys have a king, we're not taking that away. You guys will continue to have a king. You will cry out to God and try and change that. Try and go back to the way things were before, and he will not release you from it. As we saw in the book of Judges, the people of Israel would turn away from God, and then they would be enslaved. Pretty much similar to what they're talking about here. The ending of this little section that I read to you, it says that you yourselves will become his slaves. The people of Israel in the book of Judges, when they turned away from God, they would get overthrown by other people, like the Philistines or the Amalekites, and people, their enemies. And then they would become their slaves. And then, as we remember the cycle, after they were enslaved by these people, they would call out to God. And they would ask God to do something. They realized that the reason why they are going through this is because they turned away from God. So they turned back up to God and they asked, and God would save them from this. And he would remove the rulers over their lives. He would take off the shackles on their hands and get them out of slavery. And so what God is saying here, what Samuel is saying through the words of God, is what was happening in the Judges won't happen anymore because you guys are asking for it yourselves. You're asking to have a king. And so when I read that section, I think about what my parents would say to me when I was a kid, when I wanted a Nintendo 64. They would say, Luke, I know you think you want that. I know you think that that will give you everything that you want and you will have a ton of fun with it. But really what's going to happen is all you're going to want to do is play this Nintendo 64. All you're going to want to do is not hang out with your friends, not go outside, not read books, and just play this thing. And all of a sudden, you're going to find yourself not very good at sports anymore, something that you like. You're going to find yourself not very good at school, not making good grades, and not really having that many friends, because all you're going to want to do is sit by your TV and play this game. But the difference between this story from 1 Samuel 8 and my story was that I had parents that didn't let me get that. And now that I'm an adult, I see why my parents said no to that thing. They didn't give me the Nintendo 64 because they were right. But the difference is God here gives what the people want to the people. And so in verse 19 of 1 Samuel 8 it says, "But the people refused to listen to Samuel. 'No,' they said, 'we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles.' When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, 'Listen to them and give them a king.'" And so that's what happens. The people of Israel get a king. Despite the warning from Samuel, despite looking at their history and seeing that they have been successful people without a king, they choose not to look at that, and they look at the nations around them. They see what they are doing with their kings, and they say, "We want that." And after the warning from Samuel, the Lord gives them what they want, and they end up having a king. Now, why am I talking about this Nintendo 64? Why am I talking about that? There are things in your life that you will want, and God is going to say no at times. But the difference is, one day you will have the opportunity, maybe it's even today, you will have the opportunity to do what you want. You won't have parents like me telling you no. And no, you're not going to get a Nintendo 64. You will have the freedom to do what you want. And that's because the Lord loves you. And the Lord isn't going to just restrain you and make you be a robot and just tell you to live a certain way and make you live that way. No, instead you have free will and you have the opportunity to do what you want. And so that's what's being practiced here. Despite being warned by God, despite having a rich history of knowing what the Lord has done for them, the Israelites are choosing not to listen to God. So what we know here is that there's a cost to not wanting what the Lord wants for your life. Simply because the Lord will give you, or the Lord will allow you to have what you want or do what you want to do. Now, I'm happy. I'm telling the story of, I'm not complaining to you guys about my parents and about how they didn't give me a Nintendo 64. I was blessed that they didn't do that for me. But there will come a time, and there has come times in my life, where I could do what I want, and I don't have to listen to my parents. But there's a reason why my parents were saying those things. There's a reason why God is not giving the people of Israel a king. And that reason is because my parents, they knew what was best for me in my life. God, He created you. He knows what's best for you in your life. So when He's telling you don't need something, just like how when your parents say no to you, He's doing that because He knows what's best for you in your life. And He knows the things that you want might not bring you the best thing possible. The best route you'll have. As a matter of fact, they might cause you to be enslaved. They might cause you to fall into sin and live a dangerous life, or live a life that isn't pleasing to the Lord. And what this passage shows us, though, is that we have the freedom to disobey God. But as we continue to read 1 Samuel, as we continue to see who their next king is, and see the history of Israel, we just might not want to do exactly what we think is best for us in our lives. we might want to just actually follow God, because as the Bible shows us, and as I will tell you, when people tend to follow God, they don't really have regrets. They don't have a moment where they look back and think, man, I shouldn't have done that. Like what Samuel's warning about here. No, instead, they live great lives. They live abundant lives. They live the best life possible. It's only when we choose to do what the Lord is telling us not to do when we start to have regrets. So there is a cost to disobeying what God wants in our lives. There's a cost to wanting something that God is telling us no to. And part of being wise is knowing what God is wanting for our lives and not wanting for our lives. So this is an incredible story. I didn't really read it word for word, but it's in 1 Samuel 8, and you guys have the freedom to do that. And I encourage you to. And because this is the turning point for the nation of Israel. Because after this, it's about the first king of Israel. And the rest of like the chronicles of Israel's history is about them having kings and the failures that it leads to. But what I want you guys to get out of this is that the Lord loves you. And in that love, he wants a certain life for you. And that life is the best life possible. He wants what's best for you. Just like how my parents wanted what was best for me. But because he loves you, we have the opportunity to do what we want. So think about Adam and Eve, right? He gave them the freedom to eat from the forbidden fruit. Eat from that tree. He gave them that freedom. And he gives you that same freedom today to disobey him because he loves you. Because he doesn't want you to just blindly follow him like a robot. Instead, he gives you free will. But now, with that free will, he wants us to choose him. He wants us to have faith in him. Faith to provide an abundant life. But if we choose otherwise, we will quickly regret that decision. And that's what this story is telling us. And that's what the rest of 1 Samuel will show us. The people of Israel had a great system, an ideal government system. And actually in the chapter before, Samuel does, like, he executes a theocracy in, like, the perfect way. And we see that, like, the people of Israel were living a great life. But because they were seeing the nations around them and seeing the kings that they had, they wanted something else. And there's consequences to that. So this isn't a story that really ends with, like, sunshines and rainbows. Instead, it's a rough reality. That the Lord might give us what we want, or the Lord might allow us to do what we want to do. And that might lead to really a lot of suffering, a lot of struggles. But that's what this passage tells us. And I'm excited to talk to you guys more about it. We'll talk about it again on Wednesday, and I'm super excited to see you guys this upcoming Wednesday. And then again, we'll talk about it on Friday for the COVE Hangout. So hopefully you guys have some questions, and you guys can bring it there. And then afterwards, we'll play some trivia as well. So I'm super excited to talk more about that with you. But let me close in prayer real quick. I'm going to keep my hat on. Normally I take my hat off when I pray, but some students have been making fun of me because when I take my hat off, my hair's all messy. So I'm just going to keep the hat on while I pray because I don't want to get made fun of, all right? All right. Dear Lord, thank you so much for just a great story, Lord. And I pray that we can see the cost that comes with disobeying you, Lord. I thank you for just giving us your word and giving us the ability to know, giving us the ability to do what we want to do, Lord. And that I hope that we can realize that comes from your love that you have for us. And so as we continue to practice our free will that was given to you by us, Lord, I pray that we would choose the right direction to walk down. We would choose the path that you have set for us, because we know that is the path that leads to the abundant life. So I thank you for giving us that opportunity, and that's all from your love, Lord. And I pray that we all can realize that through this story, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you this Wednesday. And remember, Friday at 4 o'clock, we will talk about this as well. So can't wait to see you guys there. Have a great week. Bye-bye.